Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. Today's video is about a new Netflix series called Clark. It's a Swedish series by director Jonas Åkerlund, whom if you don't recognize by name, you will definitely recognize him by his work. He has done loads of music videos for some of the most famous artists in the world. Prodigy's Smack My Up, Beyonce and Lady Gaga's Telephone, Lady Gaga's Paparazzi. Apparently, Jonas is collecting Skarsgård collaborations like their Pokémon. He's worked with Walter on Lords of Chaos, and for Clark, we have him collaborating with Bill Skarsgård. And if you are new here and you have not already heard me say this, Skarsgård is how you say it på svenska. I only know a few Swedish words, but even I know at least that much. For those of you uninitiated, the basic premise of Clark is a dramatic retelling of the life and misadventures of the Swedish career criminal known as Clark Olofsson. Bill is portraying Clark. I was not and still am not all that familiar with Clark Olofsson, but in my quick skimming to ascertain what he is most known for, he was involved with a robbery and hostage situation at Norrmalmstorg, and the way that that crime unfolded was what ultimately led to the creation of the term Stockholm Syndrome. As I said before though, Clark Olofsson was a career criminal, so this Netflix series is not just about that one crime, even if it is his most famous one. If I had more free time, I would have probably done a more thorough deep dive into the many details of his life so that I would be able to offer up some insight into how much or how little of the material of the show is accurate versus just being a dramatic interpretation for the sake of entertainment. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the series is Jonas's directing style. It's incredibly vibrant and energetic. He definitely embraced his aesthetic expertise and that sensibility he has as a strong music video director. And this ended up being a great fit to the chaotic energy of Clark Olofsson as a character and the way that Bill performed him. There are so many different artistic and cultural styles and references incorporated that I really enjoyed watching, which made perfect sense to see given Jonas's artistic background. I also found that overall, the inclusion and execution of those visually bold and hyperactive stylings worked in tandem with this gradual deconstruction of the character of Clark Olofsson. When the series starts off, things are fun, life is great, we're getting into all kinds of shenanigans, and then gradually over time you start to realize certain details and nuances of who this person really is, what happened to him in his childhood, and his inability to process those experiences and how those experiences still affect him as an adult. We as the audience can clearly see how his mistreatment from his father has led to him being a career criminal, but he doesn't have the emotional maturity to make that connection himself. Also, I never would have thought that I would see Bill Skarsgård dancing as much as he does in this series. He was doing Latin dancing, he had a disco vibe with a Saturday Night Fever-esque outfit. There was also a reference to Elvis's Jailhouse Rock, but a much goofier Swedish rendition of it. It was just a whole lot of a whole lot. I myself have not seen every project Bill Skarsgård has ever done in his career, but this show presented so many other sides of him that I personally had never seen before in the other projects that I've seen him in. This performance is largely a comedic one, and I don't know about you, but when I think of Bill Skarsgård, I don't think of comedy. That being said, he is very funny in this role. I do think that certain things about this show are funnier if you know a bit of Swedish and if you've had some introduction to Swedish people and Swedish culture. There is a point in the show where Clark refers to Denmark as a third world country. Now, if you are watching this and you are Danish, I'm not saying that I personally agree or disagree with that sentiment, nor am I here to unpack how loaded that term is in the first place. However, what I find to be humorous about this particular example is that it speaks to a very particular type of bickering and feuding that can tend to happen between Nordic countries. Also, for as much as I've heard Swedish people roast their own language, I do think that some things are funnier when said in Swedish. For example, aldrig i hela mitt liv did I ever think that I would hear Bill Skarsgård yelling, min kuk är fan inte lite. But he did exactly that in this show. And if you don't know enough Swedish to know what that means, I'm really sorry, but I'm just not going to say it in English, at least not on YouTube. YouTube. Also, when Bill as Clark mixed up the words cannibalism and capitalism, that was funny enough that I had to write it down when I was taking notes to be able to put together a review of the show. One part of Bill's performance that I found to be particularly memorable was when he went full-on Captain Ahab in episode 5. Though there were no whales in that scene, that was still the general vibe I was getting with the boat and the yelling. The show was very good at maintaining a balance of showing us the story of Clark Olofsson through his own perspective, but also to an increasing degree, employing a deconstructive approach to his character where we start to understand the separation between how Clark sees himself and his life versus how it is that he actually impacts the people around him. It was really interesting to watch the show's approach to character because Clark Olofsson is a character that does so many terrible things on this show, but you somehow manage to still find him very entertaining and you still experience the same elation that he does when he's able to successfully commit new crimes or break out of prison for the umpteenth time. I was really trying to figure out whether or not this was so successful because of the writing or Bill's performance or the visual flair of Jonas Åkerlund's directing and this very distinct, energetic editing style that the show has, and realistically, it's probably a combination of all of those things. Another thing I was pleasantly surprised by was the casting. Beyond the very recognizable Bill Skarsgård, there were many other performers popping up in smaller roles that I recognized. There was the girl who played Ivar's love interest on Vikings, well, until he killed her anyway. There was also this character called Kai Robert, and when I saw him, I was trying to understand why his face was clearly one that I knew, and it took me a minute to figure it out because they had him in a brunette wig and with facial hair, but it did click after a few seconds. It was Bjorn Gustafsson. I was surprised to see him on the show because I'm used to seeing him be a lot more goofy, whereas in episode 2, he sort of falls victim to Clark Olofsson's aggressive insistence of doing things his own way, and it plays out in kind of a tragic way. That's a very vague way of describing what happens. I also recognize Tommy Körber, who makes a few appearances throughout the show as a judge. There was also a woman, I believe the character's name is Susie, who comes in later on in the series, and she's interested in writing a book about Clark Olofsson's life, and I was trying to figure out why she looked so familiar. Some of her facial features bore a bit of a resemblance to Noomi Rapace, but I knew that that was not actually Noomi. And I looked her up, and as it turns out, it was Alida Morberry, who is Bill's real life, well, I don't know if they're actually married, and it's really none of my business if they are, but if they're not married, then I suppose she would be his sambo. And again, if you don't know any Swedish, my apologies. Sambo in Swedish is basically a long-term committed partner, so a lot of the things that you would associate with a marriage, but just without actually getting married, that's a sambo. I've kept things fairly vague up until this point since I'm assuming that by the time I'm able to finish filming, editing, and actually publish this video, the series will already be available for everyone to watch on Netflix. So now I'm going to talk about some of the more specific details that maybe you will not want to hear if you haven't already watched the show and you want to be surprised and go on that journey for yourself. I do recommend that you watch the show and enjoy the mayhem of it all, but I don't recommend watching this show around children. There is a lot of adult content in it. One of the things that I found to be such an odd character detail, but one that in the end did seem to make sense when I started to wonder why it was there in the first place, was how Clark is consistently inept as a lover. And more specifically, I'm talking about how no matter what age he is in the story, he often finishes quickly and doesn't seem to realize that this is not particularly enjoyable for his partners. At first I thought this was something just being done for the sake of comedy, but the amount of times that it happens in the show ultimately led me to believe that the comedic value would be long lost by that point if that was truly the purpose of it being included in the first place, which made me think more about why it was there. Ultimately, this character detail of Clark often finishing quickly shows how Clark is extremely hedonistic, impulsive, and lacking in self-awareness. It also shows that he has this borderline mystical level of charisma. Even when he's very famous as a career criminal, he is easily able to charm women. Of course, I think one of the most memorable parts of Clark's deconstruction as a character is that scene towards the end of the show with his son. There's that moment of needing to make a choice between becoming his own father by leaving his son behind or bringing his son with him. It was really surprising to reach that point of his character journey because up until that point there was just so much mayhem and shenanigans for the majority of the show's run, and he's constantly getting into messy situations and just being a menace to anyone and everyone by unleashing his very particular brand of mayhem. And there was a brief moment, I'm not sure exactly when, but definitely over halfway through, where I actually started to wonder what sort of resolution, if any, we were going to get from this story, because I couldn't help but question how you could sustain this type of momentum that this person has in their life. Physically, judicially, something's got to give at some point. And I also really enjoyed that moment between Clark and Susie where she really challenges him to reflect on the emotional weight of what he has done to others. We see time and time again how good he is at just charming women into falling into bed with him, of becoming infatuated with him, and it's intriguing to see how he really struggles when he finally meets a woman who doesn't fall for any of that and who actually sees who he really is. He cannot hide from her, literally or figuratively. A lot of times when they have these meetings, he's behind bars and he's not really doing the escaping thing as much anymore at that point in his story. And even though he repeatedly tries to deflect and he tries to get her to not look deeper into his life story, she tells him, "I've heard your request, and I'm going to go ahead and ignore that and do it anyway." As far as rewatchability goes, I think the first few episodes are really fun for rewatching purposes since a lot of those episodes are just mayhem through and through. But all things considered, I think that the show overall is exactly the right amount as far as duration goes. It's only 6 episodes, and when you actually track how much happens in each episode, it's pretty incredible just how much they manage to pack in. Every episode is incredibly eventful, and if you haven't already watched Clark as a series but got this far in my video, watch it for the mayhem, watch it for the laughs, and watch it for the aesthetics. Watch it for all of the above. I had originally requested screeners not having much in the way of expectations, good or bad, since I wasn't seeing a lot of publicity for this series, but upon actually watching it, I ended up having a lot of fun. Clark is just such a ridiculous character, but he's so much fun to watch that I ended up having a great time watching the series. So thank you for watching my video. I know I've been a little bit MIA with uploading as much or as often as I would like, but I've just had a lot of things going on and I'm doing my best to multitask as efficiently as I can. I did post a tentative to-do list for my May video plans on my community tab, but I've also been emailing with some other folks who work in publicity about trying to get screeners for something that I really want access to. So depending on whether or not I get that access, I might have to do some rearranging once again. But either way, I will see you in the next one. Bye.